In January of 2025, Buchanan Hauling and Rigging was contracted by a fabricator of dairy processing equipment to move 28 tanks. The tanks would be transported from their manufacturing facility in Little Falls, New York, to a newly constructed 745,000 square foot milk processing site in Webster, New York. The biggest challenge of this project was not the heavy weight of the tank. In this instance, it was the light weight of the tank that provided a unique challenge to Buchanan. The tanks measured 100 feet 4 inches in length and had a diameter of 14 feet 3 inches, but weighed only 52,000 pounds. The core wall of the tank was stainless steel and was wrapped in a layer of insulation. An outer skin was then installed over that insulation. This outside shell of the tank was designed as a very thin layer. You could literally walk up to the tank and with your thumb push in the stainless steel, much like a beverage can. With no stability other than on the ends, someone compared the load to transporting a giant slinky. To make the transport, Buchanan utilized its 60-ton modular perimeter frame trailer manufactured by Transmaster Trailers of Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Buchanan utilized the Transmaster Super Frame on all transports and intermittently used Transmaster and Temisco Jeep and Dolly configurations throughout the project. The loaded height of the tanks posed a major obstacle to the feasibility of the transport. After the design drawings were sent to Buchanan and the transport drawings were completed, the Buchanan team began the process of finding a route from Little Falls to Webster that would accommodate a load that was originally in the 15-foot 6 range. It was quickly determined that there were hard stops that simply could not be navigated around at that height. Buchanan went back to the fabricator and discussed potential options to lower the overall transport height. The decision was made to reduce the height of the saddles to a bare minimum, bringing the loaded height of the tank down several inches and making it possible to clear the obstacles on the only feasible route identified by the Buchanan team. The reduction in the height of the saddles made the overall height feasible, but significantly impacted the gap between the trailer and the tank and opened yet another challenge, as the manufacturer was adamant that nothing could touch the tank during the transit from Little Falls to Webster. The extremely thin outer shell of the tank was compounded by a layered design. If there was a damage to any part of the outer wall, all of the layers above that point had to be removed to make a repair. On a previous project, Buchanan used inner tubes to cushion the gap between the tank and the trailer, but the manufacturer didn't want anything to touch or potentially discolor the tank. With the saddle heights reduced to virtually nothing, the airspace between the tank and the crossmembers on the trailer dropped to just 3/4 of an inch. The trailer, with 100 feet in the well, had to be shimmed to as close to level as possible to maintain that clearance. Because of the emphasis on keeping the tank free from any contact with the trailer, the stability of the trailer was paramount if the loads were going to make the circuitous route approved by the New York State Department of Transportation and make it there with no damage to the tanks. The route authorized was nearly 300 miles and incorporated 25 turns and multiple roundabouts along the way from Little Falls to Webster. Buchanan's heavy haul engineering came up with a plan to maximize trailer stabilization. The saddles installed by the manufacturer were positioned on each end of the load, meaning no weight came to bear on the length between the saddles. This left roughly 90 feet of trailer with no weight on it, and a person could literally move the middle section 12 inches in either direction with just the pressure of your foot. To stabilize the trailer, Buchanan utilized half-inch aircraft cable, stretching it on an X pattern to gain maximum rigidity. Buchanan ran 2 strands from the front to just past center and 2 from the back in the same pattern to achieve the desired stability. Because of the minimal clearance, the cables could not intersect on a crossmember. If they crossed at that point, the resulting inch of height would bring them into contact with the tank. Buchanan positioned the cables in a manner that avoided any contact with the load. Once the cables were tightened, this removed the sway from the trailer. The 25 turns all had to be manually steered by a Buchanan tillerman to minimize the pressure on the center of the trailer. Since there was no weight between the ends of the tank, the trailer would not support the tendency for the center to become the pressure point, and the manual steering was critical for the turns to be safely made. The total length of the trailer and truck combination was right at 190 feet, with an overall travel height of 15 feet 2 inches and a width of 15 feet 9 inches. The loaded configuration weighed in at 173,000 pounds. For flexibility and the economic benefit of our customer, Buchanan took the step of reducing the length of the trailer once at the offload site for the trip back to Little Falls. This was accomplished by removing 35 feet of beams from each side, getting the load under the 160-foot threshold and allowing it to be transported by civilian escorts. Once back at the loading site, the beams were reinstalled for the next iteration. The base of the tank had rings for securement to the trailer, and the upper section had lifting lugs at which to attach the chains. There were no other attachment points on the tanks. Buchanan enjoyed a great working relationship with the New York State Police. Permits had to be in place 48 hours prior to scheduling the police, and the travel time allotted was Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. With a goal of transporting at least one load per week and an initial requirement for 2 stops along a 300-mile route, getting started right on the dot was critical. Loaded or empty, there was no weekend travel. Initially, the travel occurred in 3 stages, but with the efficiencies developed and the assistance of the state police, we were able to lower the transport time frame to 2 days by getting approval to stretch the initial stopping point to a different location. Buchanan began each transport day with a safety meeting between the Buchanan crew, the civilian escorts, and the state police. These safety meetings emphasized the specific issues related to the portion of the transport to be completed that day. To get the loads west, the route started to the east and turned south. About 30 miles into the route, there was the low overpass that was largely responsible for the redesign of the saddles. Even after the saddles were reduced to allow minimal clearance, it was not an easy process. To get the tanks under that overpass, each load had to pass under the far left side of the road, the highest point of the clearance between the road and the bridge above. Even there, the towers on the trailer were lowered to bring the frame down to pavement level. The load then proceeded at crawl pace until the tank cleared the bridge. The length of the trailer, combined with a 5-inch road clearance for the normal phase of the transport, proved to be a challenge on the hilly route, as the tank often came close to bottoming out. Buchanan was able to use the 30-inch stroke in the towers to raise and lower the load as needed to ensure the trailer did not strike the roadway. In addition, the speed was reduced to roughly 25 to 30 miles per hour to minimize the flexing of the trailer. There were a number of challenging turns along the route. In one instance, a needed right turn simply could not be made. There was a major utility pole very close to the corner of the intersection, and then across the street was a building constructed right on the road frontage. To mitigate this issue and keep the project moving, Buchanan chose, and was approved by the state, to go left for a few hundred feet, back into an empty lot on the right, then pull out left to continue the route. The lot owner, a local U-Haul dealer, graciously allowed Buchanan to utilize his property for that maneuver. In Clyde, New York, Buchanan faced its most challenging turn. A brick structure was built with only a narrow sidewalk between it and the road. To execute this turn to the right, the road signs were removed and the tank was able to clear the building by mere inches as it made its way to the north. This maneuver required optimal communication and collaboration between the driver and the tillerman every time it was made. With this turn safely completed, the loads were only a few miles from the delivery point in Webster. The Buchanan team put in over 400 hours in preparatory activities, including engineering, trailer preparation, route running, and meetings with the local governments of the communities through which the road would pass. Buchanan drivers and crews spent roughly 3,000 hours in project execution over the 28 transports. These transports began in April and were completed in August. All 28 tanks were delivered to the new dairy processing facility in Webster, with no damage to the tanks, no damage to Buchanan equipment, and no damage to the traveling public or the roadway on which the loads travel. The job was lump sum with cost plus on the New York State Police. The project ramped up at one point to include both of Buchanan's 60-ton Transmaster perimeter frame trailers, and with both trailers moving, it was completed on time and was a profitable venture for Buchanan Hauling and Rigging.